So, I just think that's all on its own pretty fascinating how Tchaikovsky, from the ballet has changed. By the way, if you're into Tchaikovsky, tomorrow, the Symphony Orchestra Anchorage has its first concert, and they're doing the Academic Overture by Brahms first, then they're doing Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5, and we have the pianist who's won multiple awards, John Chen or something, I don't remember his name, but he's playing the piano. And then following that, we have Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, which I think is the one that he was most depressed when he wrote, because I think that was right after he tried to commit suicide in the river, right, the Neva? Are you into Tchaikovsky? I believe he was a depressed gay person, but, well, not that, but that's just historically we know more about him now. A biography is just incredible anymore, because they really have so much more opportunity to research individuals, and they're thicker, but way more interesting. But so that was a little plug for the symphony. By the way, the opera this year, I think last week, then I mentioned Candide, right? By Leonard Bernstein, the American version of Voltaire's play, which was a pun on Leibniz, who I talked about, right? The opera's performing that live with the orchestra this year downtown at the PAC. So, if you're interested in having your kids learn stuff about that, and they're old enough, if they're too young, symphony doesn't really work out very well, because they've got to be able to sit there. By the way, even as adults, the ushers will not allow you to use your phones and stuff. So if you're sitting there with, they'll come down and go, no, actually they don't hit you, but they'll use their taser. No. No, they're not allowed to do that. But if they see you again, they'll push you down the stairs. No, I'm kidding. I'm not allowed to do that either. Well, that is the scariest thing in the PAC, is those stairs. Plus the idea of knowing that we're sitting on a fault, an earthquake fault. That's why my wife and I sit at the right by the door at the top balcony, which is also the closest place to the bathroom, by the way, which is her design. So, okay. But so why did I do this? Well, our topic is Schopenhauer, and the article we're looking at is The Vanity of Existence. But there's also another article that I really like too, and that's Art Clears the Mist. But the two of them together, and we'll talk about Schopenhauer again later on in the semester, but the two of them together are interesting in the way they describe his philosophy, how his philosophy is a significant one that we can look back a lot and try to figure out how did this all happen. He's basically arguing that art communicates the truth, even though we can't really utter or say what that message is, but that the power of art, good art, and there's an awful lot of stuff, of course, that is classified as art. Artists try to sell things, if you look at it, you think, a swizzle stick made out of moose poo, okay, that's funny, all right, so tourists might buy that, but I'm not going to buy it. And I wouldn't like hang it on my wall or anything of that sort, right? It's kitsch, right? It's for sale, it's, as Sir Roger Scruton says, it's like the little plastic statues of the Blessed Mother and family, that the churches sell. It's not art. It doesn't even feel religious. But, they sell it at junk shops, gift shops all over the place, I suppose. Even you could buy stuff at the Holy Family store if you've I'm sure there's other places, but that's the one I go into at least every once in a while.
The pictures that they showed, though, it didn't even look like they put any effort into identifying
The
them.
nose is over here. Somebody got the lipstick on the wrong.
It's like the
Did
color
the Blessed
was-
Mother wear lipstick? You know? I have a statue of the Pietà from when I was a kid, because I was at the New York World's Fair where the Pietà was on display before the guy took a hammer to it. Thank goodness. You know that happened, right? Somebody, when it was back in Rome, it was on display, and some crazy guy took a hammer and went up and banged the nose of the Pietà. They had to fix it because he damaged it. Now you can't get near it, right? Of course. Right? But and my favorite, my first quiz question for tonight is, what do you think is the most beautiful art? And I think everyone would agree. Might not be your favorite, but you might think of it as the most famous, right? Is that like one of the number one on your list of most famous art?
Most famous.
Most famous. Maybe not your most favorite. I remember my dad was disappointed the one time he had a chance to see it, and they had the scaffolding all over while they were working on it, so he didn't actually get to see it.
I was just
Huh?
there.
You were just there?
Yeah. It's crazy how many people go in there and try and take pictures though. Security is all over in there, and they just yell at people left and right. No pictures, no pictures. But it was really cool.
Yeah, how do they even know that you're not taking pictures? Because
They don't. There's so
you
many
could walk
people
in now
there.
with GoPros and stuff
Yeah.
that, you don't even know that it's a camera, let alone.
Cameras, or
It's-
a camera on your glasses.
Yeah, I mean, I have the weirdest cameras. This one, I actually dropped this in the museum. But, like, the guards will be looking at, like, when we had the display of the polar bear exhibit, which wasn't about the polar bears, even though there were a couple pictures of them. It was about the Russian-American relationship, right? And one of the things that was there was the check that we used to buy Alaska, right? If you had seen it, it was there. And the guard said, no pictures of the check. They didn't want flashes, I guess, et cetera. But you could take pictures of the other things, So I'm raised Roman Catholic. I don't do, when people tell me not to do something, I don't do it. But, nonetheless, if you have a camera like this, you just go like this. That's 360. Oh, by the way, I just took your picture.
Of all of it?
Yes. It's 360. So it's like
weird.
whole world all in one. See? Look. I'm not kidding. And it's a video.
I can't believe I jumped.
Let me try it again.
No.
See if I change it to video. Did I change it? It's still on the other one. Maybe that wasn't. No, now it's a video. So now if I push it, see, now it's recording, and it's 360 and a video.
That's crazy.
So go ahead and jump again.
No.
Anybody want it? No, I can't. Okay. So how do they know? We have cameras all over town that are stimulated to go on by motion. How the heck can that be? I mean, they're not on, but somebody walks by and they notice it and wake up and take videos of the guy checking your door to see if they can steal your laptop. this guy. So that's just fascinating, I guess. But so I think this is great art. By definition, Michelangelo. And we could talk about music, we could talk about sculpture, the plastic arts. There's, of course, different categories, because music, except for discs and things of that sort that enable you to actually record it and then play the same piece over and over again, traditionally wasn't thought of as a plastic art because you couldn't have a copy of it. So the performer performed it, and it was live and gone, right? Same thing as ballet, right? They didn't have videos, so that this it only happens once. So if you want to see it, you've got to be there. But now, of course, what are we going to do? We have YouTube videos of practically every ballet that occurs everywhere in the world, every day.
And people can
Live
video,
stream it, yeah.
live stream it
And
on
so
every social media.
how can you actually figure out which one is the best? Which one should, do we immediately go to the Bolshoi or Nureyev? Who's the significant artist that would be worth watching doing something amazing? Plus, I have an Oculus Rift, and one of the things I just looked at, I guess a week or so ago, maybe it was less than that, I saw it was free. I didn't have to pay for it. I downloaded a video from Amsterdam where one of the Van Gogh sons, the grandsons of Theo, was giving a tour of a special the paintings of the 5 sunflowers. So Van Gogh liked to paint sunflowers. You probably might have seen one if you've been at the National Academy of Art or whatever. You get to see them one at a time, but what they've done is gathered, was it 5 or 6? I think it was 6. 6 they actually had present, and I think he explained that there was actually 7 originally done, because he really liked them, but they were different, the patterns were different. So he actually explains them in the room while you're standing there, and you can go as close as you want to look at the video, or the paintings in the room as the grandson explains what happened and everything. All for free, all in your den, wherever you want, for free, with the Oculus Rift, so that it's like you're in the room looking at them. So you can say, as he's comparing the different patterns, do you see the patterns? And you can. So it's like you're in the room, and that's going to get more and more that way. We're going to have more and more opportunity to be overwhelmed with all of this media and availability of our. So how do you choose what's important? How do you choose the significant things you should be looking at? I mean, I think that's going to be more and more of a task. How do you pick the books you should read? Every day, more books are published than any individual could possibly read in their lifetime. How are you going to decide which ones are going to be the significant ones you ought to read and be familiar with, to be educated, right? Interesting. But let's go back to those 3, and keeping in mind Schopenhauer's argument that art tells you the truth in a way that we can't really speak the truth directly. It's kind of unfathomable. You can't quite express it in words, although it's kind of confusing, because in the one article he does say, well, but philosophy can. What? You can't say that. He's confusing, right? But if you were to say what, the Sleeping Beauty waltz communicates, what's the truth that you feel it might communicate to you? of course, I'm asking you to do something that he says you can't do. We can still talk about it.
I didn't see it.
So I played the ballet, da, 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 you know, they're all dancing.
Oh, okay.
Then I played the old cartoon version of Disney, where she's dancing with the owl in the coat, and then all of a sudden the prince gets in between and sexually harasses her without, he'd be arrested today. But back in the day, that was teaching young males how to do it. Grab her by the arm and not let her go, right?
Well, she's crazy. She's dancing around with animals.
She obviously is uncomfortable with him. And,
Yeah.
you know, and we're trained so that if we're in a situation where we see a young man do that to a young lady, we're supposed to come over and say, oh, stop that. But when I was a kid, that was encouraged. So that's kind of interesting. And then the Maleficent version, where I'm not sure if they actually changed it to a minor key, but it sounds, as you said, darker. They did just slow it down. I know you, I walked with you once upon a dream. Eerie music in the back. I know. Now is that where it becomes minor? I know, right, there's a minor shift there, I think. Remember, I don't have any talent, so sorry about that. So what's the difference? There is a difference. There's a difference between all three of them. So the melody that Tchaikovsky writes for us is trying to communicate a truth, but it's clearly a different truth. Do you feel like?
It's a play on emotions.
Well, absolutely. Well, we know today that we can wire our heads up and our thoughts are musical. So if you look at the waves going on in the head, if you're a normal person, right, what we see is kind of a music in the head, right? And by the way, when we play music, if you like it, you can actually shut it out and not like it. But if you're listening to music, the music will transform the waves of your brain to fit the waves of the music. Hence, instant emotional communication, right? It's kind of interesting that if you have things like ADD going on, there is no clear musical wave. Instead, you've got kind of static, which kind of suggests that individuals that have things like ADD can't think in a tune, focus, right? Because they've got so much static going on. So that's kind of interesting. It's also one reason why they're now finding much more use for music feedback. You know, you could have yourself wired up and listen to it, and then you can like help control yourself, so you can calm yourself down by, right? What's that called? Anybody remember? There's a name for it. Something.
My son does music therapy, and so when he's in school and he has to do like things that make him focus and concentrate, they play things with rhythmic instruments, with the drums.
So they're using techniques to try to
and it,
stabilize the patterns that.
but it's up here. It's getting this to
On
not
that wavelength.
fire everywhere.
Right.
It's following that pattern so that you can
Mhm,
focus long enough to do something.
Cool. So yeah, music communicates an emotional state. Can make you cry, make you happy. I used to do a thing with classes where I would play a whole bunch of different melodies, starting off with Jaws. You know, how does this make you feel? I'm going to be bit in half any minute. You know, and I would play a bunch more. The violin piece from Schindler's List. If that music doesn't make you cry, you need to see a psychiatrist. You know, that kind of stuff. So I did like 9 of those pieces. Then I surprised everybody by pointing out, guess what? John Williams wrote every single one of those, because they're all like from one album even of John Williams' hits, right? But what's the emotion that each of these, and it's amazing how people come, you know, even listing them 1, 2, 3, 9, it's almost, they're all describing the same kind of emotion.
And with Maleficent version, he also reinvented it to where it got your attention. It made it new for my ears, so I really paid attention.
Well, I couldn't figure out, how did they pick what's her face to do it? Well, actually, if you listen to some of her other albums, they all sound like that.
Right, so they kind of got her personality already and knew what they were looking for.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh yeah. Oh, they're incredible
Right.
today.
It was pretty powerful.
Although movies is not the #1 art form of the day. How many folks know which art form today makes the most money?
Video games.
Video games. I mean, and they're incredible. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Look into it, my goodness, because you when you buy the game, you're not like buying a $14 DVD. You're buying a $60 or whatever. Destiny 2, right? Plus, you have to have the machine for it, updates. I don't know.
There's no double player.
Accessories.
You guys are all just talking consoles, you guys are forgetting your phones.
That too, the microtransactions, you know.
But I think the most money is in consoles.
In the
In the consoles.
in the consoles.
As a parent, I'm
And
telling you, I
PC
spend a lot of money on my kids' stuff. So.
Not to mention the internet bill that has to go along with
Exactly,
it.
the high-speed internet, exactly, that you don't get in Alaska.
That's true.
It's unlimited.
That's true. My daughter keeps coming, Dad, how come we've already used
Yes.
31 megabytes?
Yep. You
It's
need a
just
bucket.
day 2.
You need a bucket.
What are you talking about? Our internet account.
31 megabytes, that's like 10 minutes.
Well, maybe you should gigabytes,
Probably
some
said
kind of
gigabytes.
bytes. I don't know what kind of bytes. Zillion bytes. What's the kind of bytes that the crazy scientist in Back to the Future says?
He says
Oh,
gigawatts.
Gigawatts. Well, that's totally different.
Shock value.
Okay. So this is kind of interesting, I suppose. We could talk about that and try to figure out what. But let's talk about why Schopenhauer is so hard to figure out, at least for normal Americans, I presume. Mostly normal. I don't know what normal is, actually.
Normal's relative.
Yeah.
Nobody's relatives are normal. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Okay, so let me take us back to Immanuel Kant to explain Schopenhauer. So Immanuel Kant, and we can think of this as the Copernican revolution in thought, which is odd because Copernicus and his revolution is the one that tells us that the Earth goes around the sun instead of the sun going around the Earth, right? Kant and his revolution tells us that we're the center of our experience, which we all absolutely agree with today. Everybody in education, in the educated world, is at least a post-Kantian today. So we have to understand Kant to even be part of the current conversation, basically. And that's because what stimulated Kant was British empiricism and David Hume specifically, who argued that we can't really know anything. Because if everything that we know for sure is based on our empirical observation of whatever it is that we feel we know, like that I'm standing in this room, right? I'm absolutely confident that I'm standing in this room talking with you. Right? I have no doubts, no Cartesian doubts, that I'm in a matrix or anything of that sort. But of course, the trick is that that's the way that it appears to me. I'm absolutely confident that's how it appears to me. I don't even have to worry about whether or not it's real or not. All I know is that's what I absolutely know I'm experiencing at the moment. But then Hume goes on to point out that if I'm like remembering what I did yesterday, guess what? That's not the same kind of experience. That's my memory, and memory can be wrong. So I can't trust my memory of the past. Well, guess what? When I started talking to you just a minute ago, that was in the past. So guess what? The only thing I can know at any one moment is that I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing right now, but everything that I think of as happening already is now a memory, and I can't trust it. So where Descartes will say, I think, therefore I am, and he's absolutely confident that there's a thinking thing that exists, David Hume points out, what thing are you talking about? Because there's no persistent self, which we've already discussed to confuse everyone about what that means, that we have such a persistent self, right? So Hume gives us the idea that the only thing you could know for sure is what we're experiencing at the moment. Well, Kant, of course, is woken up from his rationalist slumbers at this point, which is actually a quote from his Prolegomena. It was this very thing that woke me from my rationalist slumbers. So that's a famous quote. Because he realized, hey, this is a problem. We have to solve this, right? So what Hume is actually saying is that what we're experiencing at the moment is all we actually know, or we can know that we're experiencing. You know, that's for the British empiricist. That's what we know. Is what I'm experiencing at the moment, and that is phenomena. And that's really a neat word actually, because in Greek, phene means a lantern. So if you're walking around in the dark, pitch black, with a lantern, anything that you can see because you yourself carry the light that enables you to see it. Right? You know, so great metaphor, you know, because what I'm experiencing because I have my own eyes, I have my own ears, etc. Right? You know, so I'm seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, etc. And so everything I'm experiencing through the filter of my own mechanism of perception, right? Right? And you can't get out of that, right? You're stuck. That's the only thing you can do. Wait, and today people absolutely believe that in at least the modern world, right? We all absolutely recognize that, well, yeah, of course, you're seeing, hearing, tasting, touching things and experiencing them as your particular body perceives them, right? It doesn't really make sense for you to talk about the way it really is, apart from your perceptions, because, well, we can share. We can say, oh, we all talk about that hat being orange, or being Under Armour, the sweatshirt, and you're I'm so fly.
What is orange?
What is I'm so fly? That's an expression, I suppose, that I'm totally missing somehow.
Peter Pan.
It's Peter Pan?
At the bottom it says, because I never land.
I'll never grow up, that's for sure.
Weird jokes though.
Yes. Okay. So we all agree on that, no problem. But for Kant, the problem is that's not all it can be. Because somehow we can all agree on the things that we're experiencing. And Hume doesn't give us an explanation for that. So Kant tries to do it. And what he says is we have kind of a set of categories that enable us to experience things. Notice there are a couple different tables of judgment and so on. This is the table of categories that Kant gives us. And there's, if you're familiar with Aristotle, you're probably familiar with something similar what's the difference? Let me pull up the same sort of thing with Aristotle. Okay, so this is not in a square, but notice we have substance, which in Greek is ousia, which, if you're familiar with the big argument in the Council of Nicaea between the two opposing parties, the Athanasius was a proponent of saying that Jesus was homoousios, whereas Arius, the heresy, was saying it's homoousios, so that's where we get the expression not one iota of difference, because it was one iota, one Greek letter I, of difference between the two theories of who Jesus, how Jesus could be God, right? On the one hand, Arius was saying that he was only God and not man. Athanasius was arguing that he was both God and man totally. Very confusing, but nonetheless, that was the argument. And that was the one that won, right? So, ousios is substance.
Through the Holy Spirit. For good measure.
Oh yeah. Well, we've got all kinds of fun. That was it. It was included in the creed, so they didn't forget that. But so ousia, everything for Aristotle is substance, and you might even say that there is no contrary or not. So there's no such thing as non-substance for Aristotle. Right? But then quantity and quality, right? Quantity is where we get quantum mechanics and things. It just means how much. Quality, the kind or quality for the most part is positive or negative quality. Place, time, and so there are 10 of these for Aristotle. You could look them up if you like, right? Whereas Kant, I don't know if it's because he's German or what, he likes 12. 12 is a better number. So you end up with 12 categories for Kant. But they're basically the same. But here's the difference. For Aristotle, he was describing everything categorically as saying they all had these characteristics. So everything had the characteristic of being one thing, but also having many parts, which confused the heck out of the Greeks. That became a problem for them, because it seemed a contradiction to say that something was both one and many, as an example. But for Aristotle, everything has all of these characteristics. With Kant now, we can't actually know all of the actual characteristics of the things we're experiencing, the phenomena, but it's our minds that impose the categories on them, because that's how humans perceive things. We perceive things in units, and we perceive them in multiplicities. We perceive them as affirmative or negative, or happening now, at this moment, right? And notice for Kant that you're the perceiver. So all of this stuff comes from your mind, and so if you think about it this way, that explains really the Einsteinian cone of light, right? Somehow I've gotten into the French version of this. I don't know why. But it's the same. So this is us right here, right? And we're traveling through time. This is the future. This is the passé, right? And so as we're moving, you're the center. You're the focus of all experience. Because, well, as Kant says, you're that perceiver. Right? And so your mind is structuring all of this experience. Right? So he gives us what is, I think of it metaphorically as kind of a window through which we're seeing our experience. But notice, you can't actually see the window, says Kant. You can only see the phenomena. So you're not, I know if I'm looking out a window, I'm actually seeing the window. And today you're seeing the drips, and everything on the window. But I'm using this as a metaphor here, that you're seeing through this, but you don't see how your mind is structuring things. And that's actually true. We're not seeing like a grid in front of us that's telling us, okay, so that's this and that's left and that's right. No, we don't do that. Right? But then he also gives us the ego, which is the self, right? In Latin, right? But so the ego is experiencing all of this stuff. But again, here's that problem that we're still faced with. You can't see yourself, right? The same problem we have with the mirror. I look at the mirror, I see my reflection. It's not really me, it's my reflection. Right? Theoretically, there's even a time lag, right? Because of the speed of light, but in any case, so I can't see this structuring set of categories that impose rationality on how I experience things. And myself has to be there because I'm the one that's perceiving the phenomena. Who else is receiving it? Has to be me, right? And we also have this thing in itself, which are the things that are interacting. So an orange doesn't taste like an orange, except to us, right? To me, right? I don't know how it tastes to you. I presume that because we have a lot of characteristics in common, that it's probably pretty similar to you. Although I know that there are people that have better, I'm always pointing out my wife smells much better than I do. She tastes much better than I do. A lot of that we know is because women have many more taste buds and many more receptors in their nose. Genetics, right? So women traditionally, but that's a range, right? So some women smell better than others. Shouldn't say it that way. Sorry.
Just roll with.
Well, okay. So some people taste bad. That's bad too.
It's also true though.
Yeah. Well, why is it the males tend to be the chefs? I don't know that. I suppose that's an anthropological question. I love throwing odd tidbits out there. Don't know where that. Yeah, but they do. It's like all the great chefs. Except of course, if you talk like this and you're. What's her name? What was her name? Can't you remember?
Julia Childs.
Julia Childs. I didn't even see the movie. Okay. And then another thing is God, etc. We'll call that the noumenon, which is what Kant calls. And for Kant, we cannot actually know anything for sure about the noumenon, but it must be there. Famously, Kant argues it has to be there. The great quote that used to be at APU on the wall, and they took it off, and I don't know why, because it was really a neat quote. I'll see if I can repeat it somewhat without butchering it. But the two things that Kant found most amazing was the starry heavens above and the moral light within. Did I say that right? Anybody remember the quote on the wall? The Karl-Gottstein building? No, it's the first building as you go up, APU. Karl-Gottstein is the second one, right? Nobody familiar with the APU? The more expensive little arts college that sits.
I've got a couple classes online, but that's it.
Okay. Okay. So we're only experiencing the phenomena. That's what we see, etc. But it's structured by our perceptions, our categories, right? And it's the self that's having the experience. And what we're experiencing, those things are really out there, right? And God really is up there, even though we can't actually see any of the things outside of the phenomena, right? Well, this irritated the heck out of the whole next generation, who came along, flags waving, as W.T. Stace says in his book about Hegel, flags waving, and went to the very top of truth itself. Kind of a neat book, right? Because they came along and said, this is just really dumb, saying that this is all we can know. But we must have an ego, but we can't know it. We must have these categories, but we can't really know them. And time and space. Everything we experience in time and space. But not everything. Only if it has dimensions do we experience it in space. So abstract concepts we don't experience in space. But along came the next generation and they said, no. Because the hypothetical thing in itself, the concept of God, who, by the way, commands us to know him, so boy, you're not being a very good Christian if you don't know God and you, in fact, you can't know him, right? That's, wow, not very Christian. And Kant was a Christian, right? All of that has to be phenomena. And it is. And because it's in our heads that we're thinking about it, we're conceiving of it conceptually in our language. So for Hegel, it was spirit. In the sense not of kind of like a wispy, weird fog like we had today, actually. Or even spirits in the sense that you use a still to boil the liquid off and then you capture the spirits again and you end up with alcohol, right? Which was sacred because it was obviously spiritual. No wonder it gave you a way of being in touch with the divine, especially if you drank enough of it. That's the key. But for Hegel, what we're really talking about here is what I would call language or culture. So kind of an interesting contrast. I would say that Kant's philosophy stimulates psychology, trying to figure out what makes us rational. And of course not everybody is, so how can we determine the different ways of knowing whether or not somebody is psychologically healthy versus not, right? Lots of different schools come up. You have, not in order, but you have the Gestalt psychologists who feel like, well, we do actually perceive patterns. And those patterns, if you're a healthy, rational person, you see the correct patterns. Whereas if you're not, you see weird things. If you've ever taken the Gestalt test, have you ever tried that? Anybody played? Right, you've heard about it though, right? That's where you see a bunch of cards, right? Bilaterally symmetrical cards that aren't anything. And the psychiatrist holds them up, although today I guess you use like a computer, I guess, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Right? And you see them and you're supposed to say what you think you see. Right? And basically they'll analyze your responses and decide whether you're crazy or not. Now that just seems totally unfair. Of
Well,
course,
who gets to decide what image is crazy?
they do. Well, like if you see, well, I when I was a graduate student and I was thinking of going into seminary after, I had to take this test for the diocese, and they gave it to me at Hahnemann Hospital in Philadelphia, and the psychiatrist just sat there at the table, gave me the cards, and recorded my comments. And I didn't even find out until later that they said, "You're sane." I was like, whew, But you're sitting there thinking, I've got to pretend that I see something here. You can't just say, this is a bilaterally symmetrical ink blot. That's all it is, right? Yeah, that's another bilaterally symmetrical ink blot. And another 50 bilaterally symmetrical. I didn't see anything. I would probably have been crazy, I think. So you have to see something, but you don't know what. So you've got to make stuff up. And if you're saying, Spock, oh, maybe I shouldn't announce that I'm a Trekkie. Oh, maybe that was wrong. But if you say, that's my mom with an axe, no, you don't want to say that either, because Rorschach test, right? Have you ever had a chance? It's a scam. We're just playing a game here that they've invented. You know, this is how we can tell if you're sane. I think you're insane for thinking it will. But nonetheless, there's certainly something to it, because we now know today, if you're familiar with, this is a really great book. It will really be helpful if I can remember the name of it, right? The Age of Insight. Random House. Who do I want? Oh well, Amazon, I guess. Is this going to come up and ask me, do you want to donate to? No. Okay. Yep, it did. I always do that. So the Age of Insight. By the way, thinking of beautiful art, you think of that picture as beautiful? Have you seen it before? Lady in Gold. There was a movie a couple of years ago about the Jewish woman who tried to get that back from Austria. It was like the main painting in their Vienna museum, but it had been stolen by the Nazis from her family, and that was actually a painting of her sister. So that was interesting. Helen Mirren was the star in the movie. Not seen. I think it was called The Lady in Gold. But so Eric Kandel is a Nobel Prize winning researcher. He did his winning experiments with mice brains. So that was way back, trying to figure out how brains work and so on. And what we know from current studies on the brain is that and the optic relation. I don't know this stuff except from reading really this book. Is that have like little computers on our eyes, so that our eyes really can't observe everything that's going on, but we're using them very efficiently. So we're basically trained to be concerned about certain motions that we're then noticing if those motions occur or not, right? And then the rest of it is actually a memory of what we've already got stored, in the brain, right? So what we're noticing is not all of this. We're not seeing everything over and over and over again. We're just noticing the little differences that take place. And so there's and by the way, each receptor only can take one photon, and then it's out for a little bit while it recharges, while the other photons are told by the mind, okay, so watch for this to see where it goes, right? This is incredibly complex, what's going on in your eye, in order for you to pay attention to that woman walking along, as she goes, right? In high heels, right? Right. And you're gonna, somebody's getting stabbed over here, the plane's crashing into the building over here, but you're watching the woman walking along. Priorities, right? So there's these little computers that tell our eyes what they're supposed to be watching. But those computers are trained by our culture. Right? So that people from different cultures will actually be observing different things. So when the eyes have been trained to watch things. Right? So that's really interesting. But so we do see patterns. That's way more complex than the windshield wipers on the Volkswagen going full in perfect beat with the music, while you're watching people walking along in the same beat. So it's not really the way. Although you could do this test yourself, presuming you have a car, and in the car you have a radio or some device so you can listen to music. And as you're driving along, notice that people walking will be walking in beat with your music. And the real test is if you change the music to something else and the beat's different, they automatically change to match the beat of the new music. And yet, of course, they don't even hear your music, unless your car is going wompa, 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 right? Which it shouldn't be. So that's kind of cool. So we do perceive things in patterns. So that much the Gestalt psychology has correct. But then there was, well, Freud. Did I ever mention how my mom's, the first time I was reading a book by Freud, my mom was beating me for it? Did I tell you about that? I came home, it was Father Hennigan in senior year, assigned this book, Freud's The Future of an Illusion, right? I came home with, my books, put them on the table, went to the bathroom, and when I came out, my mom started hitting me. I don't want you reading Freud. And I looked at her with tears in my eyes, and I said, but Mom, it's Freud. So she stopped hitting me and realized, oh, you have to read Freud. Because she started senior year high school. Yeah, she usually didn't hit me, but boy, she must have taken a look at this future of an illusion, and he doesn't take very long before he says things that are remarkably insulting to everybody. And it's still today, I look, driving along, I remember as a kid seeing a church and thinking, wow, that's beautiful, Notre Dame, all these different, with the great big steeples and everything. You read Freud's Future of Illusion, and every time you see a steeple, you think, that's another penis sticking in the sky. You can't get away from it. It's just horrible. But he did to and you just can't. And the Washington Monument, who was it that said, oh, it doesn't remind me of Washington so much as it does Clinton, That was years ago. Oh, sorry. All right, so, Frankl's pretty cool. If you're familiar with Viktor Frankl, logotherapy is another great meaning therapy and basically narrative. So if you're thinking in terms of the narrative that you believe in, that gives you the guide to your life, right? If you don't have a good one, you're depressed. If you have a good one that gives you, or that that you believe that story and you have this role to perform, then you have a purpose in life. And Viktor Frankl is a perfect example of that. It's also, by the way, logotherapy. From what I've never, I think I've participated in some things that were similar, but it's where you don't just try to work with the individual that's having a problem. You work instead with the family members together with that individual, because the illness is happening because of the relationships, not just because of the individual. That's part of Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. But so following Kant, there's this attempt to figure out, okay, so what creates that rational structure that gives everybody that rationality? Where does it come from? Well, with Hegel and his contemporaries, Fichte and others, you end up now with the sense that this is an evolving concept of structure, and it comes from our culture, from our history, from our language, right? So all of these elements really are what structures that rational self, right? And of course that means that we're not all the same. Different cultures, different time periods in our lives, your maturity changes as you get older and you learn different things and so on, right? So it's much more dynamic. It's not just you're rational, you're not. It's like, wow, everybody is their own person, right? And by the way, so Hegel's book, The Phenomenology, and there you go, the study of phenomena, right? So the Phenomenology of Spirit, right, comes out in 1807. So, and this is the paradigm shift, which you have that concept then. Paradigm shift is actually a Hegelian term, right? So this came out in 1807. This is an evolution of culture and my own spirit in it, right? So for this generation of philosophers, which is also tied into the Romantic period, if you're familiar with the way we categorize those, right? Gives us a kind of a sociological interpretation of rationality. In fact, one of the books that describes how this works is so this is a book by Terry Pinkard that describes Hegel's phenomenology in more contemporary terms. And notice the subtitle, The Sociality of Reason. Now, I know officially Auguste Comte, the French philosopher, was the official founder of sociology, but if you familiar with this whole time period, this really gives sociology its birth, all of this stuff. So it doesn't do away with psychology. Psychology is how you can study, the individual's mental ability and might tie it in with groups somewhat. Sociology, though, is the study of people in groups, right? So you're looking at group interactions and so on. Kind of interesting, I don't know if I already mentioned it, but remember Descartes gives us the cogito, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, and today we refer to it as the sociological cogito, right? So, Randall Collins. In his book, The Sociology of Philosophies, towards the last chapter, you get into the sociological cogito. So we no longer believe that you can have your own private language. You need language in order to think in these conceptual terms, because it's a language play, right? But in order for you to do that, you can't have a private language. You have to have others that tell you whether or not you're saying something that makes sense or not, that are double checking your use of the language, right? So you can't really have your own words and make up your own words because you can't keep track of what you meant by stuff. But if you're in a society that's all speaking roughly the same language, then we can tell you if you were wrong for saying, women smell better than men. Wait a minute, that means this and not that, right? So you get reinforcement of the meanings from that society. So language means a group. So, yes? So cogito ergo sum changes to I think, therefore we are, right? So it doesn't just prove that I exist, it proves that we exist in some sort of sociological sense, right? That we have a culture, we have a language, and so on. Okay, so how does this then go back to Schopenhauer? First off, I should point out that Schopenhauer is the ugliest philosopher I've ever seen. You may be right.
Doesn't look sweet.
He did have a French poodle.
That makes it all better.
There's a what are those called where they're just black silhouettes? You know, the a daguerreotype, I think, something like that, of him standing with his dog facing away from the, right, you know, the picture.
Yeah, like a profile?
They're, like, you see them framed, it's like just a black crepe paper thing of the outline of the face. I think it's a daguerreotype or something of that sort.
I don't know what it's called, but I'm trying now.
Yeah. There it is. What do you think? Will I be able to find that? Maybe not. Oh, there's a painting of him with the dog. That's not too bad, right? I mean, anybody that loves a dog, it can't be all bad, right? So, and his book, his major book is The World as Will and Representation. So here's where he's interesting. He disagrees with the generation that comes after Kant and argues that you can know everything. It's all cultural. We're inventing these words for these things, right? So that's what they are. You know, it's not like you can say, oh, there's a thing in itself that we can't see. You know, in a sense, we always hold the idea that there's stuff out there that we really don't understand yet. You know, that there's more to reality than just remember the models, right? You know, if we think of the model-dependent realism, using these different models to perceive things, and the tools that help us see things that we wouldn't otherwise have without the tools, but don't confuse the tool with reality, because there's always more out there than just what we can conceive of with our tools, right? So that's okay. But what he comes along and says is, nope, they're wrong. There is something that's the Kantian noumenon that's out there. That's not God, because he's an atheist. And he's the first one who's influenced by Asian philosophies, which is actually why I'm wearing this. It's kind of a two-pronged joke, actually, because it's the Tao, right? And yet it's also kitsch, because it's got, you know, the Mickey Mouse ears. So it's kind of like little statues of the Blessed Mother, and right? It's cute, right? And, you know, as soon as I saw it, I bought it. In fact, I just saw this at Walmart today, and I know, gosh, are you enjoying this class, or am I just totally crazy on you?
Can it be some of both?
Yeah, I suppose so. Look.
Yeah, I just saw you, but that's awesome.
And I've been getting some really great comments too. Jeannie Devon, I think I subscribe to that philosophy. Steve Whittle,
I like how it's 3 pints instead of a half gallon. Notice how they keep doing that? They keep making them smaller and smaller.
I picked a box of cereal off the shelf the other day, and was surprised that when I pulled it off, it was a page.
Right.
One bowl.
Where's the cereal?
Add water.
It's gotten thinner and thinner, yeah. Though as far as I know, no one has tried to sell dehydrated water. But boy, the market for that would be fantastic.
Just that.
Yeah, all you have to do is
Just
water.
add water, and you're all set. You know, and you can add water to taste. Okay. So Schopenhauer disagrees with them and says there is something out there. It's will. And art is just representing that will. And will is out to screw you. Maybe I already mentioned this. It's Schopenhauer. I think just this summer I read a really great book by Rudy Safransky on Schopenhauer. life I've hated Schopenhauer because of how pessimistic he was, how rude he was to Hegel, who was very nice to him. So I just thought, and his family life was the pits, right? His mother hated him for the same reasons I did. So when I was reading the book by Safransky, I thought, yes, I'm in even agreement with his mom. He's a miserable kid. So that made me feel good reading that and knowing why he was the way he was. So I would have respected him, of course, read his stuff, but nonetheless, just feel like no, that's wrong. But what he's ignoring the cultural milieu. He's ignoring the way the other philosophers all moved along, and that represents progress. To me, even Marx to some extent was retrogressive because Marx took Hegel what he thought was the next step, but he did away with the spirit. He accepted the idea of progress. But his answer was the economy. It's the economy, stupid, and becomes really a great economist and really gets the economics going, right, as a science, among others at the time. Adam Smith, of course, would be the British economist that we think of, who's a contemporary of, because Hume was older than him. But Adam Smith was the student that would have been influenced by Hume, but prior to Hegel and that kind of thing. So Adam Smith, right? The Wealth of Nations. Everybody's familiar? Yes? No? Adam Smith? Should know Adam Smith.
Father of modern economics.
Because all this stuff is a conversation. I don't know if you've caught on to that yet, but what we've got going on is this conversation which, reading the literature and seeing the interactions between them, you see this kind of growth in our understanding of ourselves and history and so on. And by the way, that conversation still continues today. And to really be part of that conversation, you really have to grasp where it's been. Because all the people that are conversing about all this stuff have read these people in school, right? So that they're building on these guys' work, right? So if you're going to be part of that conversation, we need you to do this, because they're the people that are going to solve our problems, we hope, right? Right? Sorry, it's a little gesture there. I hope you're going to solve our problems. Keep Trump from blowing up Korea and keep Korea from blowing up Anchorage, Guam, or wherever, right? We got to get on your course, though, because it's happening soon, I think. Really stepping up the ante here, calling one another names, right? Are you following the news?
No.
Yeah.
No? Yes?
Yes.
Our president is calling him Rocket Man. And he called him the aging dotard or something, so I'll show him with fire, The other day, somebody posted a sign on the bridge crossing Eagle River Road, the one that comes from Highland, right? And so as you're driving underneath the bridge, there was a sign there, where people post things like "Happy Birthday, George" and stuff. "Welcome home, such so and so." We're driving by, and there it says, "Kill him, Melania."
Because she'd be driving by and see it.
Maybe not. Yeah, not with her high heels on, anyway. Okay, so he's the one that argues that there is this. It's really from the Asian philosophy, right? If you think about it, it's like the karma, right? the will, the Tao, it's full of energy and it's pissed at you, right? So it's, you're going to die in the vanity of existence. We're all worried about our lives, but you know what? Our lives are so short. It's like a drop in a bucket. No one cares. The world doesn't care about you. Right? You can talk about depressing. I don't know. Does this kind of stuff cheer you up when you see somebody else is depressed? Does that give you Schadenfreude?
Depends on who they are.
Thus, vanity finds expression in the whole way in which things exist, in the infinite nature of time and space, as opposed to the finite nature of the individual in both, in the ever-passing present moment as the only mode of actual existence, in the interdependence and relativity of all things, in continual becoming without ever being, in constant wishing and never being satisfied, in the long battle which forms the history of life, where every effort is checked by difficulties and stopped until they are overcome. Time is that in which all things pass away. It is merely the form under which the will to live, the thing in itself, right? So notice that little sketch I gave you helps fill in some of the vocabulary, right, if you're not familiar with it. And therefore imperishable has revealed to it that its efforts are in vain. It is that agent by which at every moment all things in our hands become as nothing and lose any real value they possess. That which has been exists no more. It exists as little as that which has never been. But of everything that exists, you must say in the next moment that it has been. It's already over. Hence, something of great importance now past is inferior to something of little importance now present. So even if you do something significant right now, it's done. It's gone. So life sucks. And you're going to get sick and die.
Do you really need a philosopher to tell you that?
The trouble is you need a philosopher to disagree with them. You need a narrative that gives you a more positive outlook. This is pessimism. This is like, I hated it from the get-go because it's like, what a sucky philosophy. Warum muss denken so? Right? That's no good for me.
So who's the opposite?
Well, Hegel. I like Hegel. I'm a Hegelian. I said that once on the radio and a caller called in. It was one of the talk shows here in town. And I even got my little certificate. I survived. But the caller called in and says, "What is he?" I said, "I'm a Hegelian." He says, "Well, I don't know what that is, but I think we ought to get rid of them." Well, let's take a break. Like, should we take a break?
Oh, you really meant it. You weren't talking about the radio show.
Oh, yeah, he was